Um, I have a few quick thoughts on just some studies that I've kind of been doing recently with correlations between God's omniscience and how that affects our free will, I guess. And it's obviously a fairly deep study as far as that goes, and from the conclusions I've come to so far, it's been pretty. I don't know. It's really enriched my view of God and just how majestic and powerful and praiseworthy He is. And so, with that said, some stuff I'd been looking at was the view of theological fatalism, and that's just the argument that that divine foreknowledge isn't compatible with free will. So, more or less, as one philosopher asked, does God know or does He not know that a certain individual will be good or bad? If thou sayest He knows, then it necessarily follows that the man is compelled to act as God knew beforehand he would act. Otherwise, God's knowledge would be imperfect. So that's kind of the supposition, or the stance that they take, is that it would be impossible for free will to merge and unify with God's omniscience. And so I got to thinking about that and how that would work, as far as, I don't know if it makes sense. In my mind, it took a while to kind of get to that point where I was like, what am I even studying here? But once I did get there, it was very fascinating, the thoughts and, I don't know, the theories that there are. So one leading Christian philosopher in today's time, William Lane Craig, has come up with a couple of possibilities, arguments, I guess. The first one is, if God foreknows the occurrence of some event, E, does E happen necessarily? But his second one is one that kind of falls more in line with what I'd been thinking about, and that is that if some event E is subject to chance, how can God foreknow E's occurrence? And so when we think about our free will, and I don't know how all of you define free will, but I think of free will as we're presented with many decisions and many choices to make, no matter how big or small, every day. And it's up to us to choose whatever we end up going with, and from there proceed down a longer path of choices. And so a statement that I read was that only actions that are free-willed are seen as deserving blame. And that's something that makes us as humans unique, is we have that option of free will, so we have a responsibility. And so with all that said, I guess what I'm getting at is, for God to know everything beforehand, and like was stated in some of the philosophers' thoughts and ideas, is how does that converge with our free will? And so the theory I came up, I didn't really come up with it, but it merges with another theory called middle knowledge, God's middle knowledge. And just a quick excerpt on what that is. The doctrine of middle knowledge holds that logically, prior to His decree to create a world, God knew what every possible creature He might create would freely do in any possible set of circumstances in which God might place him. On the basis of this knowledge of such counterfactuals of free will, and His knowledge of His own decree to create certain creatures in certain circumstances, along with His own decision to know how He Himself shall act, God automatically knows everything that will actually and contingently happen without any perception of the world. So, in a simpler way, the way my mind kind of simplifies that is that for our free will to exist and coexist with God's omniscience, God would have to know the path of each and every single individual choice that we will or won't make. And that would be the case for any individual, past, present, or future. And so once I reached that conclusion, it boggled my mind just how omniscient God is in that case, because there's a direct path that we are going to go on based on our choices. But every single little choice that we make affects that path. And for us to still have free will, but for God to be completely omniscient, He would know, for example, if I eat something or don't eat something, I make a choice to eat something that would make me sick, then that sickness would lead me to another choice of whether or not to go somewhere or not to go somewhere, and that would affect my interactions with certain individuals whose choices would then be affected. So putting it in that perspective, any individual ever living on earth, God knowing that path which He would take based on those choices, it's very, very intense, and it really takes a lot, because that's a lot. There's just an infinite amount of choices for us to have free will for, but then for God to know every single path of every choice that we will or won't take is just mind-boggling for me. So those are kind of my thoughts in my study so far. I'm still searching. It's not even close to scratching the surface, but as far as the extent to which God is able to affect those choices or not, whatever, I mean, it's really something else. But I just figured I'd share some of that with you, and hope it at least made a little bit of sense, and maybe kind of enriched your thoughts on just how powerful God is, and what His omniscience really means for us. So those are just some quick thoughts. As far as an invitation goes, if any of you are in need of prayers or even salvation, that the choice is really up to you, and God knows whichever way it's going to happen. So whatever your situation is, whatever the circumstances, God knows all, and He's blessed us with that free will. So if you need prayers or encouragement or whatever, we would love to bless you with that as we stand and sing.